So, yeah, this week and next week, giving this primer on abortion, probably going to attempt to get through what we would call the biology arguments and the personhood arguments this week, and then the bodily autonomy arguments next week. That's the my body, my choice arguments. So first, we have to define abortion. And abortion, broadly defined, is basically just the termination of a pregnancy. And so there can be 3 different kinds, and not everyone will label the second or the second and third one as abortions. Most of the time when people are talking about abortion, they're talking about the first one there, elective abortion, which is the termination of a pregnancy by the choice of the mother. I should say most of the times by the choice of the mother. Sometimes they feel forced into it by their father or their boyfriend or husband or something like that. But essentially that's what we would think of as abortion typically. There's therapeutic abortion, which is the termination of a pregnancy due to a health condition. So it's because of the life of the mother. And spontaneous abortion, which is the termination of the pregnancy, which happens naturally, so miscarriage. So therapeutic abortion, essentially, while a miscarriage may be difficult emotionally, nobody really sees that as an ethical issue, except for maybe if we're talking about the problem of evil or something like that, which we covered a couple weeks ago. Therapeutic abortion, most people, hey Elijah, most people are fine with therapeutic abortion. The vast majority of pro-life people are in favor of abortion if it's to save the life of the mother. There are some who are not, but most people are, and as far as I know, currently every state that has a law against abortion also has an exception for the life of the mother. Okay, so elective abortion, that's abortion as we would generally think of it, became legal in the United States with the Supreme Court decision of Roe v. Wade in 1973. And Roe v. Wade made abortion legal in the first 2 trimesters of pregnancy. So what was going on at the time? I'm trying to remember the history of it, but there was a prior case where there was a court case that had to do with birth control. And basically, the Supreme Court ruling in that particular case was essentially that people using or not using those sorts of things are personal health choices. Okay, so essentially what it came down to is it sort of carried over and set precedent for the idea of basically your sex life is your private medical decision, and it's not up to the courts to be in on that. So the extension of that was essentially the Roe v. Wade decision that basically said abortion is not, it's a private medical decision. It's a private decision made between a doctor and the woman who's seeking the abortion, and private medical decisions, the government doesn't get into private medical decisions. So that was essentially what happened. Now, Roe v. Wade made abortion legal in the first 2 trimesters of pregnancy. Planned Parenthood versus Casey in 1992 should replace the 2 trimesters criteria with viability. Viability is currently around 20 or 21 weeks. And it's getting better all the time. Well, that depends on where you are. So if you're, way out in the middle of nowhere in India, it's probably not 21 weeks. But at like a top tier NICU in the United States, it's going to be somewhere around 20 or 21 weeks. Planned Parenthood versus Casey basically established what we would call indirect moral standing, okay, which I'll talk about in a minute. But basically, it's famous for saying something along the lines of that when life begins is determined by each individual person. Essentially what it says. Partial birth abortion ban in 2003 that requires the fetus to be dead before extraction in a dilation and extraction. It's called a DE abortion. So they have to, essentially you can't just go in and start cutting the fetus apart and pulling it out. You have to kill it first and then cut it into pieces and pull it out, okay? And often this is done by, well, it had their various methods, but I think primarily it's by burning, like a chemical burn sort of thing. Overturn Roe. Roe was overturned in 2022, and the debates moved to the state level at that point. And then there are also a bunch of heartbeat laws. Now, most of the people who support heartbeat laws are, the essence of heartbeat laws are basically this. If we determine that death happens when the heart stops beating, then we should legally say, basically to be consistent, we should say that if death happens when the heart stops beating, then life begins when the heart starts beating. Now, most people who would say heartbeat laws here would probably say that life begins before that, but they're basically saying at that point, we know for sure. Okay, so there shouldn't be any dispute once there's a heartbeat that this is a living thing. Okay, so that's the general idea. Any questions on the court cases or legality or anything like that? Mm-hmm.
I was going to say, you're saying that in case they decided that when life begins should be decided by each individual person?
Yes. So essentially the mother decides when life begins.
So could you just decide life begins long after someone's already born and then until someone's actually legally protected? Like, that just seems
incoherent. That would seem to follow, but I don't think that they would say that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, man, but I'm saying it's a dumb thing to say. Because
Yeah. Yeah. Did you have something, Rocco? Okay. All right, so there are 3 major fronts for the abortion debate. The question of, are the unborn human? The question of, are the unborn persons? And then the question of bodily autonomy. So biological arguments, personhood arguments, and bodily autonomy arguments, okay? And like I said, we're probably only going to get through those first 2 today and then go through the other ones next time, or the other one next time. Okay, so a fundamental question is about what we call direct moral standing. So this is a discussion within ethics, a discussion that a lot of different ethicists will have, you can have this about, say, animals, right? Like a dog, does a dog have direct moral standing or indirect moral standing? Okay. The question here is to say, do the unborn have direct moral standing? By the way, I suggest using the word unborn, because if you say baby, you're sort of emotionally loading the conversation. If you say fetus, for one thing, it's can be inaccurate for the early stages of pregnancy. And so you just sort of bypass that whole thing, just say the unborn. It's a pretty neutral term, and it covers all stages of development prior to birth, from conception to birth, essentially. The idea of direct moral standing is that this thing in question, whatever we're asking the moral standing of it is, has properties that qualify it for moral consideration on its own. Something with direct moral standing is something that has, that you have to take into consideration on its own in moral dilemmas, in ethical decisions, okay? And that moral wrongs can be done against it, okay? And then indirect moral standing. That's basically the thing only has moral standing if it's given that by something with moral standing, okay? And you can't do moral wrongs against it directly. So if someone, let's say that someone just smashes your car with a baseball bat. They haven't done a moral wrong against your car, they've done a moral wrong against you. Because your car has indirect moral standing. It's not something we have to take into consideration on its own as a moral thing. But if somebody hit you with a bat, that is wronging you. That is, you do have direct moral standing, okay? And so pretty much everybody's going to agree that human beings that are born, especially adult human beings, do have direct moral standing, okay? Now, one major difference, and this is kind of an interesting difference here, is that essentially pro-life people will say that the unborn have direct moral standing, and pro-choice people will say that the unborn have indirect moral standing. So essentially, the pro-life view is that the unborn have to be taken into consideration morally in any sort of ethical decision, and the rights of the unborn weighed against the rights of the woman involved in anything like that. Pro-choice view typically is that there's indirect moral standing. That is, that the unborn only has moral standing. We only have to take it into moral consideration if the mother has given it that moral standing. If the mother says, I want to keep this baby. And if that's the case, then it has moral standing. Okay, does that make sense? I wasn't all that confident in that, yeah.
So, what if someone besides the mother gives indirect moral standing to the fetus or the unborn?
That's a prickly question. Because there have been a lot of discussions where there was, say, a woman that wanted to have an abortion, but the father wanted to keep it and said, you know what, you don't even have to be in this child's life. I will take care of it on my own, whatever. Don't even worry about having to pay child support, whatever. I will deal with it all. and the woman just has an abortion anyway. So it would seem that there should be some other ways that there could be indirect moral standing in those ideas, but most of the time, the moral standing of the unborn is going to lie directly in the lap of the woman who's pregnant. So that's just basically societally and legally the way that it goes. Yeah. Okay, so here's a syllogism that is basically just an argument in standardized form. This comes from Life Training Institute. It's basically the argument against abortion, essentially the pro-life argument. 1, it is morally wrong to kill innocent human beings. 2, abortion kills innocent human beings. Therefore, 3, abortion is morally wrong. Okay? So, it's wrong to kill innocent human beings. Abortion kills innocent human beings. Therefore, abortion is morally wrong. Okay? How might somebody challenge this?
They're not human.
Okay, that's the first challenge, right? To go after premise 2 and say that's not acceptable, that's not an acceptable premise because the unborn are not human beings.
Or you're not killing it.
Or
It's not alive.
You're not killing
I
it
don't agree
because
with
it's
that.
not alive. Okay, yes, that's another argument that's made.
All the personhood arguments challenge premise 1.
Okay, yeah, you could say personhood arguments, and that would go against premise 1 to say that there are some human beings that you can kill, ones that aren't persons. Yeah. And then the third argument that we're going to look at, bodily autonomy arguments, would probably just say this conclusion doesn't necessarily follow because of other circumstances. So we'll talk.
This would technically be going after premise 1, that would just be saying that it's not always wrong.
Right. Yes, it would. That is correct. It would be going after premise 1, saying that there are times when it is okay to kill an innocent human being. And so, yes, you are correct, Davis. Okay, so challenge 1, the argument against premise 2, humanity, biological arguments, essentially, arguments from biology. Premise 2, they would say, is false because the unborn are not humans. The unborn are not humans. The issue here, hey Nathan, the issue here is that modern embryology has essentially settled this question. Modern science has essentially definitively answered this question. The unborn are distinct, living human beings. They are distinct, living human organism. In fact, most people who talk extensively and actually dig in, professionally discuss the ethical issues surrounding abortion don't even mess with this one because they all agree. Everybody knows at both sides, pro-life, pro-choice, both sides are in agreement that the unborn are completely human, completely living, distinct human organisms from conception. So why include this? Because there are a lot of people who don't realize this. There are a lot of people out there who say, well, we don't know when life begins. We don't really know when life begins. And the abortion debate is all about when life begins. That might have been the case back in the 1960s or something like that. Even by the 1970s, when the two most famous papers that have ever been written essentially on abortion by Thompson, Judith Jarvis Thompson, and Warren, even at that time, it was pretty well understood, the biology of it. By the 1990s, it was extremely well known, and now it's without a doubt. The embryo is a genetically distinct living human organism. Okay, it's an individual with its own direction of development. It has its own genetic fingerprint. Right? It's genetically human, and it's genetically distinct from both the mother and the father. It is a self-contained entity. It is living, it's growing, it's reproducing, and it's reacting to stimuli. Okay? Metabolizing. Okay? So biology gives us an objective, empirically detectable marker of human status. Without a doubt, from conception, distinct human organisms. They're not basically like a tumor, okay? They're not a part of the woman's body, okay? They're not just a clump of cells, okay? They are a distinct, living human organism, okay? So that idea throws a lot of, it throws a lot of shade, I guess, on the, to use the term, on these biology arguments. The biology argument is no longer usable, but people use it all the time. And the people who do use it, it shows that their understanding of the science behind it is at least 50 years out of date. Okay? So here is another thing to keep in mind about humanity or biology challenges. Fights over innate human worth are made from both ends of the spectrum. Okay? So there are religious appeals to human worth as created by God. So people are created in the image of God. And so human beings, because they are created in the image of God, have an innate human worth. Okay? But it's not just religious people who say that. Human rights groups say that. Human rights groups will say, just by being human, humans have human rights. And we should fight for safe work environments and, not in fighting against genocide and those sorts of things, because humans have an innate worth. Even the Humanist Manifesto says that human flourishing is important and that humans have worth and that human flourishing is sort of the point to our existence, to continue to flourish. And if that's the case, humans are important. Okay? So, any questions about the biology or anything like that?
So, what would you say to people who, like, I know it's a, distinct growing human being with human DNA, But I don't think we should give it the same rights as everybody else has until it's born or some sort of plan like that. I see people make that argument sometimes.
That's this.
Yep.
So that's a great transition to our next thing. The next discussion is essentially the personhood arguments. And that is to say that there becomes a point when we have to take this human into consideration. So if we go back to this idea here of direct moral standing versus indirect moral standing, they'll say in the early stages of pregnancy, the unborn has indirect moral standing. But there's a certain point when when the unborn then has direct moral standing. When is that line? Some people will say it's viability. Some people will say that it's when there's a heartbeat. Some people will say that it's conception, and some will say that's when it's born. Most people are going to say most pro-choice people are going to say somewhere in between. Or at birth. And some after birth. We'll get to that in a second. Most pro-life people are going to say direct moral standing starts at conception because the humanity of the unborn starts at conception. Okay, so basically the syllogism equivocates on the word human between premise 1 and premise 2. So if I go back to my syllogism here, I'm shifting all around here. Basically that when we say it's morally wrong to kill innocent human beings and we say abortion kills innocent human beings, the idea is that it equivocates. So it's that's a technical term for saying that we're using human beings, the same word, in two different ways. Okay? And essentially that there are two different types of human beings. There are human persons and there are human non-persons. There are humans that are not yet persons and there are humans that are persons.
I feel like I've seen people say this a lot throughout history.
Yeah. People have said this throughout history, and a lot of times it has led to atrocities. Nazis said it about the, people with disabilities. People have said it about slaves. They're humans, but they're not persons. Those sorts of things. We'll talk about that too, but essentially there are two different types of human beings. Those which are persons and those which are not. Only persons can be part of the moral consideration. So only persons have direct moral standing. Okay? So what makes a person part of the moral? Basically, the argument that's made in Warren on the moral and legal status of abortion, which if you've never read it, you might want to read it because it's a very famous paper arguing for abortion. It's one of the most famous. And what she says is that only when you have personhood are you really enveloped into the moral sphere. So we only have duties toward persons. We don't have duties toward non-person humans. So human persons have intrinsic value. That means they're valuable just for being human persons. But human non-persons only have extrinsic value. They only gain value from outside. That's another way of saying it's sort of very similar to saying that they only have indirect moral standing. We only have to take them into consideration if someone says we need to take them into consideration, namely the mother. Okay? So that is the second challenge to a pro-life view. Does that make sense?
So then I guess, how do they define a person?
Good question. Nathan is just on top of it today.
Do they not include like a gradient of personhood? Or do they say it's fine?
Yes. Yeah. So one of the ideas is that personhood comes in degrees, that you can be kind of a person, and that, you know, you can have that idea as well. I don't think that one's going to work very well. A person is a person. And what does it mean to be half of a person or a semi-person?
Well, if you were more conscious or could reason more or something like that, whatever these criteria are,
Yeah.
right?
Well, yeah, if you were like a super person or something, but you could say that in comparison to what the unborn can do, we have a lot more of a capacity to freely do things, right? The unborn can't go eat at McDonald's, and I can. So, reasoning, consciousness for sure. But I don't know if I'm more conscious than an unborn, than the unborn are.
Like the idea of like experience. Well,
Yeah.
like, there's like newborns. They don't even have their retinas fully developed, so
Right.
they're still developing sight and other sensory awareness things.
Right.
And they don't even have the capacity for reasoning
Right.
or free will or a lot of the other things. So like
They don't have capacity for free will?
Well, also that they have the capacity for free will, but
I mean, they would freely move their arm, right? I mean,
yeah, but we even see that in fetuses.
okay,
Like,
yeah.
But I think a lot of these are kind of like more on like a spectrum based.
Yeah.
And except for free will, or maybe they think that free will is on a spectrum. But
Yeah.
I don't think you can escape from like the potential counter argument that newborns are less valuable because they score lower on the criteria.
Yes, and that is a problem, and she realizes that is a problem. So let me go over her argument.
Oh, you're saying it's like the justification for like, I could kill a newborn because of like
Yes.
these criteria? Oh, okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
And that's exactly what she says. Well, I shouldn't say that exactly. She basically makes, I'll get to it in a second. So she says, these are the 5 criteria that she would put forward for personhood. So if there's a human that has all 5 of those, then they are a person and need to be considered morally. If they don't have all 5 of those, then they are not a person, and they can be, then they have indirect moral standing, just like your car. You can send it to the junkyard if you want to, because you don't have to take it into moral consideration yourself. The same can happen with humans that are non-persons.
In her paper, does she like for example, for reasoning, does she give a correct, is it a lady or a man?
It's Mary Ann
Oh,
Warren.
Mary Ann Warren, okay.
Yeah.
Does she provide like a criteria for what reasoning is? Or does she say you have to have this, like?
It's been a couple of years since I've read it. don't recall, I think she just
Just states it.
just says reasoning, the ability to reason.
Okay. Like,
Um,
you could say that for like all these
Yeah,
things.
yeah,
What does she benchmark?
right. She'll benchmark consciousness at the ability to feel pain. I think she's just basically saying, like, consciousness is an awareness that there's something out there. Yeah, Nathan?
So, yeah, with the capacity to communicate, how far does she take that one? Like, if you're asleep, then are you not human anymore? Or if you need special equipment to communicate, like Stephen Hawking or somebody.
Yeah,
Or a newborn baby, I mean, they don't communicate very well typically.
Yeah.
right.
And they just like scream.
So that's why, that's why this is a difficulty. So she would say a fetus lacks all of those, so definitely not a person, so definitely not having direct moral standing. A potential person or something that's person-like does not have the rights of a person. So a potential person or person-like things are not persons and so should not be given personal rights. That leads to a difficulty because, as a couple of you have pointed out, newborns don't fit this. Okay? So Warren's view would actually make infanticide permissible. Now, what she says is, no, you can't do that. Newborns cannot be essentially after birth abortion, if we want to call it that. Can't happen because even though it doesn't qualify as a person, a newborn doesn't qualify as a person, there are people who care about it, and there are people who would care for it if it's for unwanted newborns, and people are against killing newborns.
So why couldn't you use that argument for a fetus?
Does she talk about that or no?
No.
Really? That's terrible.
Does she give like any actual reasoning for her criteria? Like, why should we prefer her criteria over the more, I guess, simplistic one that human equals person? Like, by Occam's razor, we should be able to figure it out.
She does, and I can't recall. It's in the first few paragraphs of her article, and I'm pretty sure what she says is that there's a difference there between the human person and the human non-person, in that there's it's just when you enter the moral sphere, essentially, is the difference. Is there's sort of a moral sphere, and once you enter into that, you have to be taken into consideration.
That seems circular, it's presupposing that you walk into the moral sphere.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't say it's physically walking into it, but people have objected to these. People have put up different criteria for these and said, well, we'll try something different. Maybe let's just say maybe 3 of them instead of 5 or something like that. And she says something like that it's possible for persons to how did she say that? It's possible for a human to have all 5 of those. How'd that go again? She said it's definitely, if it doesn't have all 5, it's definitely not a person. even though there could be some,
That have all five and not a person.
yeah,
It's like all rectangles are squares, but not all squares.
yeah. no, all
Or
squares are-
all squares, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, all squares are rectangles, but not every rectangle is square. Now, she very, I think it's basically ad hoc. Her explanation for why infanticide is not, because her argument definitely supports infanticide, she just doesn't. So she basically makes an exception and says, no, that's not okay. Others though, like Peter Singer, who puts forward different sort of criteria here, he would actually, he's sort of famous for saying that there are, that basically because there are dogs that have higher functioning cognitive abilities than a newborn, he actually take the position, and I think his position on this has changed somewhat over the years, but essentially he's famous for saying things that essentially his argument would make it so that killing a dog would be wrong, would be morally wrong, because the dog would actually have direct moral standing, but an infant would not. So, and I can't remember what people said, it was like 2 weeks or 2 months, yeah, maybe up to 2 months old, newborn, that could be,
But then why 2 months?
because then they would have the criteria of personhood by about 2 months. Whatever happens to be the criteria that they're using for personhood.
He says, Peter Singer says consciousness and sentience, self-awareness, rationality, preferences and interest and autonomy.
Okay.
And then he said killing a self-conscious being is a more serious wrong than killing a being who is merely conscious.
Right.
So now you can see, tell if something is self-conscious versus merely conscious.
Good question. I think it depends on what we're talking about, self-conscious. If we're talking about reflecting on our own existence, I think humans are the only ones that actually do that. Now, there are some of the great apes that have been seen to sort of be able to recognize themselves in mirrors and sort of things like that, but as far as I know, the studies on that are sort of,
Did you ever see that gorilla that they figured out how to communicate to him that he was gonna die, and then he lost his mind? There's this gorilla, and they over weeks communicated to him that he would die one day, and he freaked out and lost it. He was I don't know if he was he was visibly emotionally
distraught.
yeah, distraught.
He was having an existential crisis.
Yeah, it was crazy.
Okay.
I
Interesting.
think that's on the onion. I think that's
That's on the onion?
Is that on
I
the
think that's
Really on the other-
I looked at the gorilla totally would die, and everything I see is from the onion. So I think it's
Hysterical.
Dude, I
Yeah,
heard about
it's
that from
satire.
somebody, or maybe I saw that on
maybe it's
No,
the real one.
Wait, no, it's a lie. I lied.
Okay.
False information.
All right.
Dude,
It's
I
the
saw
onion.
that. I must have seen that years ago.
Yeah.
Because I've remembered that for a long time. I think I saw that when I was I don't know, 17 or something.
Interesting.
Well, I'm glad I said that so I didn't go on.
It's my favorite news source, the Onion, because it's always reliable. It's always wrong,
It's terrible.
but it's funny.
No, I prefer Babylon Bee.
Babylon Bee. What about not the bee? That's
What is that?
not the
Is
bee.
it like the opposite of Babylon Bee?
It's from the Babylon Bee people. It's basically stories that are so crazy that they seem like they're for the Babylon Bee, but they're actually real. So, all right. So, response to personhood arguments. As we've discussed, her criterion leads to absurdities like infanticide that nobody really thinks are, even she doesn't think is okay. But if she were to be consistent, she should accept that that's what her criteria shows. So how is her, and this is sort of the argument that you brought up, how is her criteria any less arbitrary than the more intuitive idea that humans are persons and persons are humans? And that someone has moral rights simply by being a human, even if they're not a person. Let's admit and say, even if they're not a person, they're a human, so they have human rights. You don't need to be a person to have human rights. You need to be a human to have human rights, and the unborn are humans. So that's sort of that's you could even take their idea and say, yes, let's say that the unborn are not persons, they're just humans. Well, it's not a personal right, it's a human right to keep living. Personhood divides humans. It's if you say that there are persons, there are non-human persons, it is a really bad thing, because a lot of the atrocities throughout the world have happened because somebody is separating humans from persons, like the Holocaust and slavery. This personhood idea trivializes the human body, making it something that can be manipulated or destroyed with no moral significance. Nancy Pearcey has written a book called Love Thy Body, in which she's making the arguments. I talked about this last week when we were talking about some of the transgender stuff. The idea that the body is important, and some people would just want to sort of dispatch with the body and say that the body is not important at all. And so it sort of trivializes the body. Personhood has also disconnected us from being biologically human, making it arbitrary. If we say, yes, I'm a person, well, could the computer be a person? Could,
How about the wall?
could the wall be a person? Could a gorilla be a person? Those are the sorts of things, like when you divorce personhood from humanity, then you start getting into from biological humanity, then you start to get into some weird areas, like pets are people too, and that sort of thing. And they're not. Humans are people. So this is another argument that some people will make, is that it's sort of a speciesist of us to say that only humans can be persons. Persons, if we define them in such a way, there are certain criteria where certain animals will be people and certain humans won't. Somebody had their hand up.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was gonna ask, how do modern Christian philosophers or theologians define personhood? Is there popular, or do they just say all humans are persons?
Yeah, essentially all humans are persons. That persons are human beings. That a human is a person and a person is a human.
And people who make from an atheist perspective or a non-religious perspective, who make the pro-life argument, how do they define personhood?
I think probably in the same way. I don't know what they would use. I haven't really looked enough into the discussion of a good view of personhood, other than to say that equal to humanity, that persons are humans and humans are persons.
I also just think that this isn't what we were like talking, the exact person or arguments we were speaking of now. But if we look back to our, like, the heartbeat laws, or something along the lines of like defining personhood based on like heartbeat, or like brain activity, or things like that, I think that then, right, how like this opens the door to absurdities like Pina says, I think those open the door to absurdities like corpse abuse. Right, because like, if we define, right, like, so those are arguments that like, it's alive, if we define dead when, you know, the heartbeat stops or when brain activity stops, that's where we should start. But we still attribute a moral value to a person,
Yeah.
even when they are dead.
Right. There's a certain aspect in which we're going to attribute moral value to some, but in that case, if someone is dead, they're really, and they don't really care. Nobody cares about them. There's not really anything to stop somebody from just, kicking their body off a ship into the ocean. It's the idea that there are other people around that care about the person's body, and to sort of respect that was a person, right? So yeah, that it does. And if you go the other way, if you're saying before the heart and brain activity, if we don't have to respect it, then why do we respect after the brain? And why do we take the time to have funeral services and bury the dead after that? It's an interesting question. Okay, so some further personhood arguments. This comes from Lee and George, The Wrong of Abortion, which is another famous paper. This one is against abortion arguments. When I say I see something, I'm using both my physical eyes, so I'm using my body, and I'm using my personal consciousness, my I. Who is it that's seeing something? I am. Well, what is that I? It's sort of my soul, but I'm also using my eyes in order to see that. So my body, when I refer to I refer to both as I, my soul and my body. So the person is identical with the body. Okay. The right to life is not one that is received or changes depending on the place the person is in. Okay? So a person doesn't change, basically a person doesn't get personhood by going from one place to another. Okay? You are a person based upon what you are, not where you are. And you don't receive it. It's not like if you go to England, then you become a person, but here you weren't a person, something like that. And this is an argument that somebody brought up a few minutes ago. What if somebody's sleeping? What if someone's in a coma? Or the argument that I've heard brought up before, the idea of, let's say that someone gets drunk and passes out. They're no longer conscious. Can you kill them? Because they are no longer a person. Did they lose personhood? Now, what they will say most of the time is, well, they have the capacity for personhood. Okay? Well, so they aren't conscious right now. They have the capacity to be conscious. But the idea is that the unborn will eventually have that capacity as well. So it's coming. So if you're like, well, this person who's passed out drunk will eventually be conscious. so we can't kill them, then the same argument could be made that the unborn will eventually be conscious, so you can't kill them either. That's the basic idea. It's an appeal to basically treating things the same way. Appeal to consistency. So an embryo has that. And then the difference between gametes and an embryo, the difference between egg and sperm and the zygote is a big difference. Sperm are not humans. Eggs are not humans. When they combine together, they become a human, a separate, distinct human. That is a fundamental change, that something goes from not being a human to being a human. But the difference between an embryo and a newborn is just 1 degrees. So there's no, to use the philosophical term here, there's no ontological difference. We haven't changed what the thing is between the zygote and birth. In fact, we haven't changed what the thing is between the zygote and death. At 80 years old or whatever, okay? So it hasn't changed. It doesn't change. There is a change when the gametes come together and form the zygote, okay? So personhood does not come in degrees. I have on here that this solution may be problematic for some Christians. Can't remember why. Yeah.
I have 2 questions.
Yeah.
One, so on bullet 3, like the main 3rd bullet, what if I said that a sleeping person is not contingent on something else? Like the sleeping person is not contingent on another person to survive.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and then I say, but people in comas, I mean, they are, what if I just like say, well, the right to life for somebody in a coma is assigned to the family.
What if it's like someone who's in a coma
Right.
and you for a fact they're gonna
Particularly
make a
long.
confession?
I mean, I've used that like argument before, like I disagree.
Yeah,
But I just wondered,
well, I'm saying that's a good,
what about like an indefinite coma?
Yeah.
I wonder like what the Christian stance on like rights to life of somebody in an indefinite coma. It's probably off topic.
Yeah, it kind of is, but there are discussions of end of life issues, and those are difficult. But if the person had any input, like they had a living will or anything like that, that would be something. And there's also a difference, especially with end of life issues, between killing and letting die. So if you take someone off of a ventilator and they die, that's different from if you put a pillow over their face and suffocate them, right? So that's really the big issue with end of life issues. There are also some of that distinction here as well, the distinction between killing and letting die. Yeah.
I would say that even if we grant the personhood argument, we would still say that the fetus or the unborn can be valuable, because from what I've seen, when people say their consciousness begins at 24 weeks or this many weeks,
Yeah.
those models are more theoretical.
Yeah.
And like the actual science or the experiments that we have on the consciousness of fetus is very scarce, and it's held back because of our current technology. But whenever we do research on this, like there's a study, the ontogeny of human interaction or something like that, and it shows that fetuses as young as 14 weeks or the unborn as young as 14 weeks actually goal-directed movement to where like, if it was like twins, they would like consciously like move their arms like towards the twins like
Okay,
eyes and things like that. And
okay,
so I would say that like, no, like as like this isn't like conclusive science, because I think that the main problem is that a lot of people inherently are presupposing like materialistic views of consciousness,
yes,
but like whenever we actually view it, like the more that science progresses, the more younger that we see creatures actually have conscious. And so I would say that
yes,
we could use that to say that it's with a high degree of certainty that from conception there is a level of consciousness.
yeah, yeah. And that's important, and the sort of the first thing that you said there is about the worth, the moral worth, and even pro-choice people would say a zygote has great worth if the woman involved, if the mother is excited about it, right? So then it would have worth because she's giving it moral worth. This is part of the reason why we have people who have abortions are not charged with fetal homicide, but somebody who punches a pregnant lady and causes a miscarriage are, right? So they are charged with or if somebody kills a pregnant woman and the unborn dies as well, that they are also charged with fetal homicide. Why? Because she wanted to keep it, so she was giving value to it, and so fetal homicide is the issue. But if she didn't want to keep it, it's not fetal homicide because she decides whether or not it has moral value. Yeah, Nathan.
So with the first point, so it says the person is identical with the body. Does that mean that we should give the dead full human rights?
I don't think that they would say that.
But that bullet point is to the purpose of saying, even if something is not like pre-conscious state of a being as
Yeah.
personhood, so the post-conscious state is not.
Yeah.
But then it no longer has potential for consciousness at that point.
That is true, but I think that they're going to make a distinction here between living and dead, because a dead body is
Well, no,
still important. It's just not.
you just say I'm using my physical living eyes to see, and my
Right.
consciousness, like, so you could say the person is identical with the living body, like.
That might be a better way to say it. Yeah. When I say when I'm saying I see Nathan, what is I? Who am I? Who is this thing? What is this thing that is seeing Nathan? It's this thing that's moving its arm. It's me. Right? It's my body, but it's also my soul that sees Nathan. I think that's what they're getting at more than the technicality of saying a person is absolutely identical with their body for all time, because then you would have like, what happens if you die and your body's like half decayed, then are you half a person? And then, you get into all that sort of stuff. I don't think that's what they would be saying. Okay, so one of the things that is important in a discussion here a lot of times what people are going to ask is a question about at what point during the process does the unborn become a person or have direct moral standing, or when do we have to take them into moral consideration? And essentially, like we've said here, the difference between gametes and an embryo or a zygote is immense. But after that, it's just degrees. And it's sort of the problem of the heap and the pile. You can recognize a heap, like if I have a heap of sand and I have a pile of sand, you can say that's a heap of sand. And then I have a big pile of sand and you say, well, that's a pile of sand. Okay, well, if I just start adding grains to the heap, at what point do you say that's no longer a heap, that's a pile? And if I take that one grain away, is that now a heap again? I put that one sand grain back and it's now a pile again. Is there a spot? Well, there doesn't really seem to be a spot. And the trouble is that any sort of place that you pick for personhood to start between fertilization and, say, birth, even birth itself is kind of arbitrary. Most people will say that the differences, people will say, well, yeah, you can kill the unborn. Why? Most of the reasons they'll say are the SLED reasons. I think this also comes from Scott Klusendorf from Life Training Institute. The idea is, why should one human be considered to have moral rights and not another? So let's say that the unborn, so they're just as human, but they don't have those rights, or they're not a person or something like that. The humanity of the unborn is not dependent upon, and this is SLED, S-L-E-D, size, level of development, environment, or degree of dependence. Somebody brought up dependence before. But let's say that we take somebody like me, and we take somebody like Andre the Giant. Andre the Giant was a big guy, but he wasn't more human than me. He wasn't more of a person than me. If we take me versus a 5-year-old, a 5-year-old is not less human than me. They might be less developed, but they are not less human than I am. So size does not matter to humanity. It doesn't matter if it's a very tiny human or a very large human. A human is a human. Okay? Level of development. Again, a 5-year-old is less developed than a 25-year-old. Okay? They're not, they don't have like secondary sexual characteristics and all that sort of stuff. Okay? But that doesn't make them less human. Okay? Same thing with the unborn. And that's the point of all of these. A tiny embryo is not less human. A less developed embryo is not less human than a more developed embryo, like fetus, which is also not any less human than me. Environment. And this is sort of a big one, because in environment, we'll say, well, it's inside the woman's body. Okay. Well, does taking the short journey down the birth canal, moving from here to here, make you more human? Or you weren't a human here, but you are a human here. And that's crazy. You can't just travel down the birth canal and become human. Okay?
On the level of development point.
Yeah.
So, this is about moral rights. So, what if I just said, so really the question is, do your moral rights to life trump, if you're a woman, my right to, like, I don't know,
Bodily autonomy.
yeah, like
Freedom.
bodily autonomy, right? So
Right.
whatever, however you want to define that, right? So what if I just said, I'm not saying like a 5-year-old is less human than a 25-year-old. I mean, but like, let's just say I have a line where, you know, at X development, that right is still growing, but now it's past it trumps the woman's right to abort. Like, let's say it's in like the 3rd trimester or something like that. I just pick something. Then, well, I guess it's kind of like arbitrary, but it's like, could it be the case that level of development does come with like some moral rights? Well, I guess maybe not.
I guess someone could try to argue that, I just don't see, but what you have to say is there has to be a relevant difference. What is the relevant difference between this size human and this size human? There isn't any. What's the relative difference between this size human and this size human?
But development as in like, I don't know, cognitive. I
Okay.
think really the big thing is like cognitive ability. That seems
Yeah.
to intuitively come with some moral, or maybe
Right.
not moral right, but like,
Well,
right.
let's say that there is somebody who is 30 years old, but they have an IQ of 7.
Right.
Are they less human?
Well, what if it's not less human, but less,
That they have fewer rights?
yeah,
If they're, and this is the kicker here, going back, you could say, if we're putting it on personhood, maybe. But if we're putting it on humanity, we say life is a human right, then humanity, it doesn't matter how developed you are, you're a human. You're a human.
But we do consider, there are cases where we kill other humans, so, right?
Yes.
So I guess this is just like, that's like the question is like, what
Yeah.
is that?
Well, that goes back to the syllogism that it's wrong to kill innocent human beings. If someone is shooting at you, such as in a war, or if they've broken into your house and they're causing you harm, they are not innocent human beings. So that would be the case. And also, they would throw death penalty in there too, those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So they would say it's not innocent human beings in that case. The last one here is degree of dependence, okay, degree of dependence. And that just means the focus on someone's dependence upon someone else, okay? So you cannot say that because someone who has an IQ of 7 is dependent upon other people, that they are less human, or that you can take their life because they are dependent upon you. Okay? In the same sense, if somebody is, just because some human is inside of you, doesn't mean that you could take their life. That's going to be the focus of next week. But degree of dependence, that one is essentially, one of the arguments is essentially that the unborn would die if it weren't for the dependence upon the woman in this case. But so would a newborn. And a newborn is dependent upon somebody to take care of it. The difference they're going to say is, well, you can give it away, but a pregnant person cannot give away their, you can't just give away the fetus.
Here's, I think interesting is I feel like if you really pressed most committed pro-abortion, like, advocates on that and said, if there was a way, if we invent a way to do it, are you then gonna say that abortion should be banned and illegal and not allowed?
Right.
And that people should only have the option to do that. Most actual committed people say, no, that abortion should still be an option in addition to transferring,
Right,
which kind of tells you.
yeah. And at this point too, there are also things that are called snowflake babies, that are essentially, if you go through IVF and you make a bunch of embryos in order to, and you try to implant them and get pregnant, you might make 12 embryos. And then you implant 2 of them, get pregnant, you implant 2 more and get pregnant, and now you've got 8 embryos left over, and you're like, I don't want to have any more kids. What do I do with these 8 tiny humans? Well, you can donate them to people who can't have children. And so that, the idea would be, what if we could do that with, say, an 8-week pregnancy? Something like that.
And this, the Professor Singer, one of the guys who said like that human, that justified the ban side said that, you know, a human baby doesn't matter as much as like an animal. He's not allowed in Germany. They don't let him go there. Because he's like, I'm pretty sure it's because his beliefs are seen as like close enough to Nazi beliefs to where it's like, yeah, you're not allowed.
And Germans don't like sit talking.
Yeah. So it's just like your persona non
That's
grata
really
is just
interesting.
not allowed to be in the country.
Well, that's what I've got for this week. The next thing is the bodily autonomy argument. So I guess we'll pick it up there next
You know,
week.
degree of dependence, that actually is like, that's probably one of the more consistent, like, arguments. Like, if I just say,
Yeah.
look, if you guys figure out a way to do it, okay, then sure, abortion's wrong, but until then, like,
Right.
dependence.
And environment and degree of dependence fall into the bodily autonomy arguments as well, such as like, is it akin to slavery to force a woman to carry out her pregnancy because she is essentially forcing another human to give the use of her body? So.
I would just like to clarify, I don't think it says he's banned from the country. It says like a persona non grata, not allowed in like events. He's unwelcome there because of that. I don't think he's literally banned from the
Imagine
country.
being
That would be kind of awesome. Like, he's like flying into Germany and airport security is like, nope. Yeah, it would be good.
I wonder what that's like
Or
to
would
be
they-
banned from it, like, to know that, like, there's a whole, like, you suck enough. Like,
Would they just say, you're not welcome here?
Mhm.
Or would they like put him on a plane and send him back?
They probably make
I
them
looked it
feel
up.
real
He's not
uncomfortable
officially
after that.
banned, but he's made a persona non grata for decades. I think he wrote something, he wrote on being silenced in Germany, so clearly he was aware of it. I think it's just like he's been disinvited from philosophy meetings and stuff, like it's like, we don't
Okay.
want you to be spreading that nonsense here.
That would be, that's like crazy.
But, I mean, how like crazy do you, like,
Well, he's
that
gonna be-
should tell you that like his views are so, it's such a review for human life, that it's like, yeah, you're not allowed in Germany because your views are considered to Nazi like, that's crazy.
That's pretty crazy.
You're not, I mean, you're allowed, but like, you know, like there's specifically your,
They
Yeah.
really don't like you, mess with you.
Any other questions on this stuff before we go? All right. Would somebody like to pray to end our time today? Okay, well, I will. Lord God, thank you for this time that we can have this discussion.